Good afternoon. Hello. If you're still looking for a seat, go ahead and grab one. We have seats upstairs. For those of you who don't have one, we're certainly a full house today, which is great. We have more people in the lobby, but we'll welcome them as they come in. I am Bernard Cherkassev. I'm CEO of this museum, and on behalf of our board of trustees and board of directors, our staff, volunteers, I am excited and thrilled to welcome you to this afternoon's Yom HaShoah celebration. We are proud to present this in collaboration with our partners, JUF, Jewish Federation of Chicago, Sheerit Hapleitah of Metropolitan Chicago, and CJE, SeniorLife Holocaust Community Services. I also want to acknowledge our community partners, Consulate General of Israel, Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Congregation Kol Hadash, and Congregation Kol Emet. I am also especially thankful to our sponsors who made this event possible, Philip and Ellen H. Glass, whose generosity supports our Holocaust Commemorative series for a number of years. It is an honor to be joined this evening by Consul General Yinam Cohen of Israel, Deputy Consul General Gabriela Beneman of Federal Republic of Germany, Hazzan Jacob Sandler of North Suburban Beth congregation, and our distinguished guests and their families who played an important role in founding of this museum and who are with us today. They include Sam Harris, Holocaust survivor, museum founder, and president emeritus of this museum, Muriel Blumstein, daughter of museum founder and board member Barbara Steiner, and Dan Thalheimer, museum board member, co-founder of 3G Chicago, and grandson of museum founders Walter and Ava Thalheimer. I also want to acknowledge all of the distinguished Holocaust survivors who are joining us today in person and also by video. We are indebted to your resilience, your passion, your commitment to remembering the past and transforming the future. And in the world that we're experiencing today, your moral clarity is a guiding light. This year marks the 79th anniversary since the end of the Shoah, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Only a few decades after the end of the Holocaust, neo-Nazis planned to march right here in Skokie, which was a motivating force for many survivors in this area to organize and create a place where people can come and learn both their personal stories and also the broader history of the Holocaust and dangers of hate gone unchecked. Those survivors continued to work tirelessly in their advocacy for Holocaust education, making Illinois the first state in the United States to enact a Holocaust education mandate that required public schools to teach about the Holocaust. The power of survivors' stories told in their own voices, and their impact was so profound that that little storefront on Main Street was not large enough to contain the multitude of visitors and artifacts, exhibitions, and programming and stories that still needed to be told. And 15 years ago, they had founded this Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, which has since grown to be the third largest in the world. And we're a testament to the hard work and resilience and the power of the survivors. Oh, thank you. Today, I feel especially proud that we build on that legacy of the survivors, merging innovative technology with the power of Holocaust education and finding innovative ways to share their stories in their own voices and reaching new audiences. If you have not had a chance to see our virtual reality films, which win critical acclaim from Venice Film Festival to South by Southwest, and acclaim of even tougher audiences, middle and high school students, please come downstairs to our theater and experience it for yourselves. And as we all know, the mission of remembering the past and transforming the future is even more important today than it has ever been before. Even taking a cursory look at the news of today reminds us that we are a long way away from that vision that our survivors had in founding this museum. We must continue doing the work that the survivors have started, teaching and challenging new generations to do the same. I hope we continue to rise to that challenge. Thank you for joining us today, and I am honored to welcome Consul General Yinam Cohen of Israel.
Thank you, Bernard, for your leadership here, and thank you for the team for putting together this very important event. It's not going to be a regular Yom HaShoah speech because these are not regular times. Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, has taken on new significance this year. On this day, in Israel, we solemnly memorialize the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis in Europe. Movie theaters and places of entertainment are closed. Celebrations are postponed. And traffic comes to a halt for 2 minutes as mournful sirens sound across our small nation. To be honest, having grown up in Israel, I thought that anti-Semitism was largely an issue of the past. However, the massacre of October 7th, the biggest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, as well as recent events here in America and around the globe, have proven me very wrong. We have a major problem in America. We have a major problem in Chicago too. We have a major problem of Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism has not vanished. It remains among us, alive and potent, sometimes overt and brazen, other times concealed behind misleading ideologies. Anti-Semitic actions have skyrocketed. The Anti-Defamation League has recorded 3,291 assaults and incidents motivated by Jew hatred between October 7th and January 7th, a troubling 361% increase within just 3 months. Throughout the decades, we have grown accustomed to Jew hatred emanating from the far right, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and others. To our credit, we have worked hard to develop the legal, educational, and political tools to combat it. Let's remain steadfast in our commitment to speaking out and utilizing every available resource to confront the plague of far-right anti-Semitism. However, no less of a concern is the explosion of anti-Semitism among the far left, including some members and organizations of the Arab and Muslim communities here in America. Unlike far-right hate crimes, which are widely recognized, this phenomenon of far-left Jew hatred often goes unacknowledged, even completely denied across many sectors. Let me be clear, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism. But singling out Jews, holding them to a different standard than other groups, is clear anti-Semitism. Hence, supporting the right of self-determination of all groups, but the Jews, denying the right of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, to exist, is anti-Semitism. Making false, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews is anti-Semitism. Calling for, justifying, or aiding the killing or harming of Jews is blatant anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, all this and more has become all too common among the far left and some Arab and Muslim Americans and their advocacy organizations in the past months. In many cases, to deflect accusations of anti-Semitism, they will brand any Jewish person they disagree with a Zionist, which we all know is just a dog whistle for a Jew. So, when the leader of the pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, and anti-America student mob in an elite American university screams, "All Zionists must die," he actually called for the genocide of Jews. In late 1938, the headline of the main Nazi student paper, Die Bewegung, read, "The goal is achieved. No more Jews in German universities." In 2024, in American elite universities, Jewish students are screamed at, "Go back to Germany, go back to Poland." There is a direct link between Holocaust denial and the systematic campaign to downplay the horrors of October 7th and discredit the victims. Since October, the voices spreading Holocaust denial propaganda have been louder and louder. According to recent polls by The Economist, 20% of those surveyed between ages 18 and 29 claim that the Holocaust is just a myth. Only 2% of people from previous generation believe this lie, demonstrating a tenfold increase in Holocaust denial in just 20 years. These are the exact same groups that downplay and understate what happened on October 7th. But even more concerning for me is the choice of some leaders to just turn a blind eye to rising anti-Semitism. And specifically here, I must say it loud and clear. Chicago, we have a problem. When Chicago's city leadership turns their back on their Jewish constituents, saying and doing nothing to combat soaring anti-Semitism in the city, including against CPS Jewish students, we have a problem. When the Northwestern University's leadership practically makes its campus a safe space for Jew hatred, capitulating to the pro-Hamas mob, we have a problem. When a Chicago-based congresswoman declines to condemn in Congress the greatest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, sending a message that Jews' lives don't matter, we have a problem. Chicago, we have a problem, and we can't turn a blind eye to it. Combating anti-Semitism is not the job of Israel or the local Jewish community. It is the responsibility of local leadership. We have the legal, the educational, and the political tools to combat this hate. We need the courage and the willingness to start enforcing them. I hope we will see this kind of leadership and commitment stand up so that the horrors of the past never happen again. The most important lesson learned from the Holocaust is never again. I say never again starts today. It starts here with you. Never again is now. I'm Israel Chai. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, please help me welcome Deputy Counsel Gabriela Benneman of Federal Republic of Germany.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Just like Yinam just said, we have to think not only about the past, we have to think and observe what is happening now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I feel deeply honored and also grateful that you have invited me to speak today on this important day. For us all, it is never easy to commemorate this important day and to remember the horrors and the suffering of the Shoah. But remembering the past and learning from what happened is not only necessary, it is crucial in our time and day. This year, we do not only remember the victims of the Shoah, we think about the events of the 7th of October last year that have shocked us all. The image of the dead and the injured and the fate of the hostages have left us in a state of total incomprehension and also dismay. The fact that yet again there is a war raging in the Near East with the cost of lives on all sides causes us deep grief and a fear for the future. What was even more disturbing to me as a person and to many of my fellow countrymen was the reactions of part of the population in the Near East, in Europe, and also, unfortunately, in Germany. When the attacks happened, instead of showing compassion to the Israeli victims, there were people who welcomed the terrorists' actions and who even cheered them on. All over Europe and also in Germany, one could notice, unfortunately, you have said it, Yinam, an incredible rise in anti-Semitism in words and unfortunately also in action. To me and to the majority of Germans, including the German government, this is absolutely not acceptable and not to be tolerated. Federal President Steinmeier used very strong words against this kind of behavior, and I quote him. He said, "We here in Germany have to be particularly vigilant. We must protect Jewish life in our country and stand strong and resolutely against any form of anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel. We cannot tolerate attempts to celebrate the brutal attacks on Israel. Anyone who applauds this terror is not only degrading the victims, they are also trampling on human dignity and our German constitution. Such behavior," he said, "horrifies me, it disgusts me." End of quote. The terrorist attack on Israel and the war in Gaza are the cause, you all know it, as for a lot of discussion and also protest, also here in the US, but also in Europe. In a democratic society, political debate and free speech have an important place, yes, but under no circumstances are the events in the Near East a reason for the use of hate speech and the distribution of fake news. And let me say it clearly. No political or military decision that the Israeli government may take is a reason to justify anti-Semitism. Many political activists that protested in Germany against anti-Semitism held up a sign, and you also said it, Yinam, and it caught my eye as well because it also said, "Never again is today." We are all called upon to be vigilant and to stop any new development of anti-Semitic tendencies in our neighborhoods, in our friend circles, in our families, wherever we may meet it. This is also why the work of the Holocaust Museum and Education Center is of so very high value, because it keeps the memories alive and it passes them on to the next generation to learn from them. Ladies and gentlemen, the war in Gaza, like every other war, is causing a lot of human suffering, hunger, injuries, death. The international community, among them Germany and the European Union, fulfills its duty to provide humanitarian aid. This is to help the weakest, the children, the old people, and the refugees. Humanitarian aid is politically neutral. It does not mean that the helpers are taking a political stand. My country is aware of its historic and present responsibility, especially towards the Jewish community all over the world and towards the State of Israel. Bundespräsident Steinmeier stressed this very clearly on 9th of October last year when he said, and I quote him again, "In these difficult times, Germany stands firmly by Israel's side. The Israeli people and the Jewish community in Germany can rely on us." End of quote. May the dead of the past rest and the dead of the present also never be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you. Please help me welcome Renee Silberman of Sheerit Hapleitah to lead us in the candle lighting ceremony.
I'm not a politician, a diplomat, a board member, a rabbi, or anyone as well-read as many of you. But I am here as a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors representing Sheerit Hapleitah, the surviving remnant. The survivor organization formed by my parents and many other survivors is a way of formalizing their decades-long kinships and mission in response to the neo-Nazi threat. Back in the late 70s, there were 2 major groups of survivors. Those whose response to the neo-Nazis was to speak to the public, to educate the masses, and to form a museum, this museum, as a way of bringing truth to the phrase, never again. The other group of survivors, those who organized Sheerit Hapleitah, saw their mission as remembrance. For decades, they had been organizing the annual Yom HaShoah memorial service for those they had lost. The Sheerit Hapleitah group also decided to build a monument to be placed outside the main entrance to the Skokie Public Library as a way of reminding anyone who would pass by that there had been a Holocaust during which millions were murdered by Nazi Germany and their collaborators. While I can't speak to geopolitics, spiritual reckoning, or diplomatic wrangling, I can speak to what my parents and many other survivors would say if asked. What do we do about what's happening in our country and in our world at this moment? What I believe they would say is this: use every resource you have as individuals, as organizations, as businesses, as professionals, as human beings, to harness your influence with politicians, with corporations, with Hollywood, with big tech, with big pharma, and places of worship to form a unified voice against the normalization of anti-Semitism and all hatred. We children of survivors weren't supposed to be here, but we are here. Mir Zenem do, and we must act as one with every ally we can bring into the fold to speak out and to prevent our society from crumbling just like German society crumbled under Hitler's leadership. And just as an aside off script, when we used to have the Sheerit Hapleitah Yom HaShoah commemoration, the politicians would be fighting to have a seat on the dais. There is not one elected official here, not even the mayor of Skokie is here today. I'm sorry, who are you? Thank you. Thank you. I did not recognize you, and that is my bad. I am sorry. I thank you deeply for being here because I know you've always supported this remembrance program. So thank you. Now back to the script. I'll stick to it now. Our candlelighting ceremony provides a template that can be used by successive generations to not only remember, but also to remind others that vigilance will always be necessary to prevent inhumanity, anti-Semitism, prejudice, bigotry, and any form of hatred from being normalized. Normalcy for Jews was never easy, but the victims of the Holocaust led full lives. They were educated, tradespeople, artists, soldiers, teachers, innocent children. Some well off, some struggling, some powerful, some working hard just to provide food for their family. Some writing novels and painting great works of art. Some researching scientific questions, some leading devout religious lives. We wish to reclaim the legacy of those victims, those whose names we knew and those whose names are forever lost. Henry Jelen, the son of 2 survivors and president of Sheerit Hapleitah, will assist in the candle lighting. We will be joined by cantor Jacob Sandler from North Suburban Synagogue Beth, chanting Ani Mamim, I believe. Miriam Hupsher and Joe Silberman will be helping at the stairs. Our first candle will be lit by Ruth Gilbert. Ruth Gilbert was born in 1938 in Łódź, Poland, or Łódź, Poland, if you want to pronounce it the Polish way. When the Nazis occupied Poland, Ruth and her family were placed in the Łódź ghetto. Ruth's father recognized how difficult things would continue to be, and in the black market, purchased fake IDs for Ruth and her mother. In 1941, Ruth's father bribed a guard to let him sneak Ruth and her mother out of the ghetto under the barbed wire. Ruth and her mother hid with a family in Lublin, but only for a few months before the family was evacuated, leaving Ruth and her mother homeless. They rode the trains of Poland as non-Jews for 6 weeks. Ruth's mother met a woman on the train who lived in Warsaw and promised she would let them, Ruth and her mother, come live with her. Ruth's mother was able to obtain a job as a maid for 6 different families over the war years. When Ruth's mother felt her employers suspected her and Ruth were Jewish, they would leave the home immediately. During the last year and a half of the war, Ruth's mother was a maid for a countess who entertained Nazi soldiers in her villa home, but secretly also worked for the underground in Poland. In 1945, Ruth and her mother returned to Łódź and stayed there for a year before leaving for Germany. They lived in Munich for 3 years and received sponsorship to come to the United States in 1949. Ruth lit in memory of the 6 million Jews who died from starvation and torture and who were murdered in the ghettos, forests, ravines, labor, concentration, and transit camps, and in all the killing centers and on death marches all over German-occupied Europe and the Soviet Union.
Imamin, ani mamin, ani mamin. באמונה שלמה, בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אחכה לו.
Our second candle will be lit by Ben Garber. Ben Garber was born in 1936 in Wilno, Poland. Just before the liquidation of the Wilno ghetto in 1943, Ben and his mother were able to escape the ghetto and go into hiding outside the city. They remained there for 18 months, along with several other Jewish people. Near the end of the war, retreating German soldiers found the hiding place. Those hiding convinced the Germans that they were Polish Christians hiding from the Soviets, and they were allowed to remain in their bunker until being liberated by the advancing Soviet army a few days later in the summer of 1944. Ben was 8 years old. Ben lights in memory of all the victims of the Shoah who were murdered in the more than 1,000 ghettos in German-occupied Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and in all of the other towns and villages.
Ani mamin, ani mamin, ani mamin. באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתמהמה ועם כל זה אחכה לו.
Our third candle will be lit by Joseph Silberman. Joseph Silberman's parents, Esther and Tobias Silberman, were both from Poland. When the Nazis invaded Vladimir Volinsk, Esther Silberman escaped, then Esther Weiner, escaped her town and ran into the surrounding forests. She joined a partisan group and was lucky and resilient enough to survive the war. Joseph's father, Tobias, was taken by the Nazis from his home in Zamość and forced to perform slave labor in 6 different camps. In 1940, he was taken to Belzec and then to Majdanek. Tobias was then sent to Skarżycko, Buchenwald, Schlieffen, and then to Theresienstadt. His parents, brothers, first wife, son, and extended family were all murdered by the Nazis, and Esther's entire family was also murdered by the Nazis. Joseph lit in memory of all the victims of the Shoah who were murdered in the designated killing centers of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Chelmno, Belzec, and Sobibor, and the victims of the concentration, labor, and transit camps throughout German-occupied Europe and the Soviet Union.
אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה, בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה.
Our fourth candle is lit by Gary Berkovich, accompanied by his granddaughter Maya Bluestone and Milana Kravitz. Survivor Gary Berkovich was 6 years old when his mother, 2-year-old brother, and grandfather fled first by foot, then by train, from Kharkov to Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Many of Gary's extended family who did not evacuate were murdered in Jabritsky Yar, outside of Kharkov. Around 17 million people eventually moved east following the Nazis' invasion of the Soviet Union. People walked for weeks, sometimes months, under bombardment by Nazi warplanes. Gary wrote of his experience on an evacuation train crossing a bridge. He said, "We were on the bridge and the planes came back. Now they were going straight at me. In the dead calm of the car, the machine gun fire and the hooting sound of anti-aircraft guns were especially loud. Like the adults, I stared outside the window, looking at the river far below. I remember trying to figure out whether I would survive the crash. I did not know how to swim. Mom was quiet, pale-faced, gripping my brother tight. He stopped crying, gazing at us wide-eyed. Grandpa prayed, his lips moving without making a sound. Finally, a few horrifying long minutes later, the planes were gone. Everyone sighed in relief. Women cried. The train kept on moving. The planes had missed. Ours was the last train to cross the bridge. Milana Kravitz's grandfather, David Tailovich, was born in 1928 in St. Petersburg, Russia, which was formerly Leningrad. David was just 13 when the city of Leningrad was invaded by the Nazis and all the roads in and out of the region were blocked. David, his sister Nina, and their parents spent the blockade supporting each other and their close community. In 1943, they escaped to Georgia and the former USSR before returning to their home in Leningrad. In 1944, after the war, David went on to become an attorney, marry the love of his life, Lena, and have a daughter, Yelena, and granddaughter, Milana, who is here with us today. Today, David lives in Philadelphia with his wife, Lena. At the young age of 96, he loves to take walks, read classic books, and spend quality time with his family. His granddaughter, Milana, recently relocated to Chicago and in participating today, honors her grandfather's bravery and continuing perseverance. Gary and his granddaughter Maya and Milana lit in memory of the Jewish victims from the former Soviet Union, Ukraine, Belarus, Hungary, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, France, Latvia, Yugoslavia, Greece, Italy, Denmark, Slovakia, and Czechoslovakia, who were murdered in the Shoah as well as those killed in massacres in Kiev, Babi Yar, Vilnius, Ponary, and other towns and villages, and the victims of the Kielce pogrom after the war had ended. Our fifth candle is lit by Zoya Nikiforovich. When the war began, Zoya lived in a cottage near Minsk in the village of Druzhny with her nanny, Matriona Ivanova Adamovich, and 12-year-old sister. Zoya was 2 years old at the time. Her mom and dad, both working parents, came to see their children on Sundays. Zoya's mother, Riva, was a medical doctor by profession and was on the front from the first days of the war. Her dad now managed to take the nanny and children to the town of Orsha as he had to appear before the drafting board at his place of residence. He was killed in autumn 1941 in the battles near Mogilev. Everything Zoya knows about the war's beginning, she knows from her nanny. The nanny quickly realized that with 2 Jewish children in the city of Orsha already occupied by the Nazis, it would be impossible to survive. And she led the children mostly on foot in search of a quieter place. Sometimes strangers took pity on them. When they got to the village of Gorbachev, I hope I did that one right, they were taken in by Ivan and Agatha Vasilichonik. Those kind people opened their house to Zoya, her sister and nanny, out of the goodness of their hearts. They risked their lives by hiding Jews. Some villagers quickly figured out that Zoya and her sister Anya were Jewish children and reported them to the German commandant. Fortunately, this village's commandant was a kind man, and he told his wife to go to the home where the nanny Zoya and her sister were to warn that German policemen were about to appear with a search warrant. The group managed to escape into the woods. After liberation of Belarus, Zoya's mother, who went through the war and finished it in Berlin, found her children with help from the nanny's sister. The nanny stayed with Zoya's family after the war. She helped raise Zoya's daughter and was considered a full member of the family. Nanny Matronya Ivanova Adamovich died In 1986, at the age of 93, she was Thank you. After her death, she was awarded the title Righteous Among the Nations. Zoya lit in memory of all of those brave soldiers, the partisans, the freedom fighters, and the militia who served with the Allied forces, as well as those brave soldiers who liberated the camps, towns, and villages of Europe and the former Soviet Union, and for the righteous among the nations who risked and even gave their lives to help their fellow human beings.
Achenu kol Beit Yisrael, Achenu kol Beit Yisrael, Hanetunim betzara, betzara ubashivia, Haomdim ben bayam uben bayabasha. Hamakom yerachem, yerachem aleim veyotziem mitzara lirvacha umeafel aleora umishivu ligeula hashta ba'agala uvizman kariv.
Our sixth candle is lit by members of the Mozak, Lazarus, and Breitbart Steiner family. Leah Kirschenbaum Mozak was born in 1922 in Cianów, Poland. She survived the ghetto there, 2.5 years in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Death March, Ravensbrück, and additional camps before being liberated by the Russian army. After liberation, she made her way to a displaced persons camp in Austria, where she met her husband, Oskar Mozak. Leah and one brother, Harry, were the only survivors of Leah's large, loving, extended family. Oskar Mozak was born in 1904 in Poignant, Poland. He had 7 brothers. He survived the ghetto, 2.5 years of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Death March, Mauthausen, Melk, and Abendsee camps. His first wife, Perla, and their 2 children, Miriam and Hirsch, were murdered in the gas chambers in Birkenau upon arrival. Oskar was liberated by the American Army in May 1945. He and only one brother survived a very large extended family. He emigrated to America in 1948, married to Leah. Matthew Steidner's grandparents were also Holocaust survivors. Matthew's grandfather, Morris Breitbart, was born in Rzeszów, Poland in 1921. He was sent to the Łódź ghetto in 1940. When the ghetto was closed in 1943, Morris and his family were sent by train to Treblinka and Majdanek. During that transport, Morris, his uncle, and 2 cousins escaped from the train and ran into the woods. They went to the house of a farmer who was known to Morris's uncle. Morris remained outside to watch for German soldiers while his uncle and cousins went into the house to ask for help. When Morris went to the window to peek in and see what was going on, he saw his uncle's and cousins' bloody bodies on the floor, and he ran. He went to another farmhouse nearby in the town of Nova Vola and begged the woman to take him in. Genya Benyakov, very poor, but also very kind, obliged and hid Morris. He remained hidden in the attic of Genya's home and then in a hole in the barn floor until late 1944. Matthew's grandmother, Lucy, was born in Nisko, Poland in 1932. After the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, Lucy's father, Gershon, was recruited by the Polish army. The rest of the family went into hiding in Nisko. They were hidden in a barn in a neighboring town. Lucy, her mother, and her brother were reunited with her father miraculously after he escaped being held as a POW by the Russians. They went as a family to Russian-occupied Poland, where they were apprehended and sent into exile in Siberia, where they remained until the end of the war. They managed to return to Germany to the American zone of Berlin. From the Schlachtensee displaced persons camp in Berlin, Lucy's family went to the Rosenheim DP camp near Munich. That is where Lucy met Morris, Matthew's grandfather, in 1948. Doris Mozek Lazarus and her husband Ron, and their daughter Jennifer, with her husband Matthew Seidner, are joined by the youngest descendants of Leah and Oscar and Morris and Lucy, great-grandchildren Talia, Jonah, and Elijah Seidner, in lighting the sixth candle. This candle is lit in memory of those whose lives, dreams, and hopes were put out before they even lived, for the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered by the Nazis. Collectively, we light these candles to ensure the never-ending memories of the victims who died, whether Jew or Gentile. We light in memory of this lost generation and what they would have brought to the world in every walk of life. May we recall not only the terror of their deaths, but also the splendor of their lives. We also light to honor those who survived the darkest hour of history. But it is not enough to remember. We must teach our children and our children's children to never forget, to stand up, and to fight for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Please turn your attention to the screen behind me for a special video message from Holocaust survivor Sam Harris, a founder of this museum and president emeritus of our museum as well.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Bernard, Consul General Cohen, Deputy Consul Beneman, Hazzan Sandler, and our incredible partners. A special thank you to Miriam and Dan. It is an honor to be with you both today, sharing and commemorating the remarkable work and efforts of our survivor community. A decade and a half ago, I stood on the stage helping officially to open the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. The skies were crying, pouring rain all morning. 13,000 people walked through the rain to celebrate with us. But as the speeches began, the skies cleared and the sun came out, light filling the darkness, the joy of the day shining through the storm. When it was my turn to get up and speak, I was walking on air. Everyone stood up. Everyone knew that this day, this moment meant what it meant for the survivors. We knew we had to educate the world about the history and lessons of the Holocaust. We knew education was the key. We were there at the right moment, at the right time. We were here to stay and put it to work. 15 years later, it has been more than a dream come true. The museum is beyond anything I could have conceived. A beacon to the world, an institution that teaches not only what happened when hatred and bigotry and scourge of anti-Semitism are left unchecked, but what is possible when we draw upon our collective strength, our hope, and our resilience. I came to the United States in 1947 when I was 12 years old. I didn't want to talk or think about the Holocaust, but like many survivors, I have come to believe that we survived for a reason. Nearly 80 years later, I do not take a single moment for granted. Instead of deciding to let hatred consume me and direct my actions in life, I decided early to let hatred go and move forward. I believe I survived to tell my story, to help build this incredible institution, and do so in memory of my family and the millions of Jews whose own stories were silenced by the Holocaust. I survived to share my pain so that others can connect with the life and history that they will hopefully never have to confront. So on this day, may we pledge to remember, and may we reaffirm our commitment to preserve the memories of those who survived the horrors of the Shoah, so that their experiences are not forgotten by our generation or by the children's generation. Thank you.
Please welcome Muriel Blumstein, second generation descendant of museum founder and board member Barbara Steiner.
When I was asked to speak at this Yom HaShoah service, I was deeply honored. My mother was an amazing public speaker. I'm not. And truly, this is the only place that I would be willing to talk today. In preparation for speaking, I did a little bit of research, and I saw that the first official commemoration was in 1959. When I was a child in the 60s and 70s, I didn't know this day existed. I have no memory of my parents ever acknowledging it. They didn't need a day to remember because they remembered every day. They did everything they could to forget. When they came to the US, they were told not to talk about what they had been through. They were told that putting it all behind them and acting as if nothing had happened was the way to move forward. They tried, but it was an impossible request. They needed a place where they could be themselves, and so all their friends were survivors. I suspect they were trying to recreate family after they had lost so many of their own. When I was surrounded by survivors, in spite of that fact, I didn't know a thing about the Holocaust, about the war in general, about their personal experiences. They could not forget, but they were certainly committed to the idea that they would not share anything with me. They were sure that by keeping me in the dark, I would be a normal American kid. Truth be told, they didn't share anything with anyone outside of their community of survivors because they had been told in words and in deeds that no one wanted to know. Then the neo-Nazis planned to march in Skokie. In the shadow of that impending march, my parents found or were found by a group of survivors in Skokie. These weren't the people I had known growing up, but they met to support one another in dealing with the proposed march. I will not mention any names for fear I would forget someone. These people really became family, not just my parents' family, but mine. In the beginning, they gathered informally and shared their experiences within the group. They continued to get together even as the march was delayed and then eventually canceled. They no longer needed to worry about the neo-Nazis coming to Skokie, but they continued to talk and their goals changed. They officially organized as the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois with a mission to educate people about the Holocaust. No one was talking about the Shoah, except in Jewish spaces. And as a result, the general population in the US had no real clue what had happened. If they had any knowledge at all, it was that the cold fact that 6 million Jews had died. These survivors understood deeply the connection between never forget and never again. And they truly believed that those who did not remember the past were condemned to repeat it. In the beginning, they were almost exclusively a speakers bureau. They had nothing but their stories, and they realized they had to share them. People who had up to this point been largely silent began to talk. Sharing those painful memories was emotionally draining. They were driven by the idea that a person who heard a survivor's story, in their own words, in their own voices, would be forever changed emotionally, and they really could not forget that experience. My father was very proud of my mother and deeply supportive. However, this was my mother's passion. She was a very active speaker in those early years, and I remember how she would come home exhausted. I think she felt it was her duty, perhaps the price she had to pay for having survived when so many others had not. I heard a recording of her pretty recently from the 1980s, and I barely recognized her voice. She was so timid, and the pain was so obvious. It really didn't sound anything like the forceful public speaker she became. I remember her heading off to different schools across the Midwest to share her story, and I'm blessed to have a lot of notes from teachers and students that she received. And it's clear to me that those people would not forget what they had heard, or perhaps more importantly, how they felt as they listened to her. In addition to arranging speaking engagements, the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois quickly began having an annual fundraising dinner too. One of my fondest memories was keeping my mother company while she wrote out the envelopes for the invitations and then the place cards. She had beautiful handwriting. It was largely survivors and their families in those first years, and it felt more like an annual celebration of survival than a fundraiser. The money raised from those dinners and the donations they received allowed them to purchase that building on Main Street in Skokie. They used the second floor for an office, and on the first floor, they created a museum, which opened in 1985. It wasn't big or fancy, but it provided a space to teach them basic Holocaust history before hearing a survivor speak, and it allowed the speakers to talk to the students without having to travel all over. To further those educational goals, as had been mentioned in the past, they also developed a legislative agenda. They wanted to ensure that students would be taught about the Holocaust to ensure it would not happen again, and after a lot of hard work, that resulted in Illinois being the first state in the U.S. to mandate Holocaust education. It was an incredible achievement, but as schools began to implement the mandate, the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois and their little museum and office became taxed almost to the breaking point. Speakers were traveling, and there were kids on field trips at the museum almost constantly. By the late 1990s, some of the founders had passed. Those who remained, joined by some younger people, mainly child survivors, had a vision for something bigger than the Main Street location. They saw the Speakers Bureau was shrinking, and they knew they wanted to leave something to carry on their mission when they were gone. They wanted a real museum. It was a big dream, but these were not people that gave up easily. They continued their normal fundraising, but knew that what they envisioned required more than they could do on their own. Thanks to Sam Harris, J.B. Pritzker was brought into a meeting. He politely listened to everyone talk about their goals, and I'm sure he thought it was absurd, especially when someone, I think it was my mother, said to him, "So, what can you do for us?" I think she didn't realize she was supposed to be impressed he had even bothered to listen. Turned out he could do a lot. While the planning took time, to me, that time flew by. They found Stanley Tigerman and created the design for this incredible building. The little fundraising dinners became big, impressive fundraising dinners. They negotiated for the land. While the time flew by for me, those years took their toll on the survivor population. My mother, at a meeting with JB, having seen the architectural drawing, and as everyone sat and discussed what the actual building process would look like, apparently told him they needed to hurry up. She wanted to live long enough to see this amazing facility open, and she was blessed to be at the groundbreaking, the opening ceremony, and to see this museum and education center filled with people, young and old. It meant the world to her. As I said when I began, this truly is the only place I would want to speak today. As a child of survivors, I could dwell on all I didn't have. But here in this place, I feel my family's presence most. I think about their strength and those of all the survivors to make this happen. On Yom HaShoah, I choose to remember that they broke their silence about the past to provide a gift that I hope and that they all hoped would help bring about a better future.
Thank you, Muriel. Please welcome Dan Thalheimer, third generation descendant of Walter and Ava Thalheimer, founder of 3G Chicago and a member of the board of directors of this museum.
Thank you, Bernard. Elie Wiesel wrote, "For the survivor who chooses to testify, it is clear. His duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would not only be dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time." My name is Dan Thalheimer, and I'm a grandson of Holocaust survivor and museum co-founder Walter Thalheimer. That quote from Mr. Wiesel was reflected in my grandfather's remarks each time he would share his story, and it resonates throughout our extraordinary museum and its ever-important mission. The ongoing legacy of our beloved survivors, both those of blessed memory and those who are still among us, is that their voices will forever remain throughout this building's hallowed halls. Prior to his passing in 1997, my grandfather spent the latter years of his life sharing his story of survival with all who would listen, and documented his testimony in a variety of ways, including being filmed as part of Steven Spielberg's Shoah project. Every story of survival is unique. Having been born in Germany in 1925, the story of my grandfather is unique in part as he was one of the few Holocaust survivors who experienced the entire Nazi era from the very beginning of its power to its final decline. Somehow, through perseverance, what he described as a minute-to-minute approach to survival, and what some might call fate, he managed to survive 4 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz. His ultimate escape came a mere 10 days before the ending of the war, as he was able to jump out of a train and outrun a Nazi cordon after a U.S. airstrike called a diversion. The fact that I stand here today before you is a miracle that no one can explain. And despite having passed away more than 25 years ago, his legacy continues through his 2 sons, 6 grandchildren, and 5 grandchildren and counting. I'd normally share more details about his journey, but the real reason we're here today is to not only pay tribute to the millions who were not as lucky as my grandfather, but also to commemorate our museum's momentous opening 15 years ago. When I would visit the museum's old small storefront on Main Street with my grandfather, only in his wildest dreams could he have imagined the memorial and education center we have the benefit of experiencing today. I wish he had been here to see our grand opening back in 2009, but to me, his memory lives in different corners of the museum. Whether it be the Kristallnacht video in the Carcomi permanent exhibit that includes an interview of him, or the menorah he sculpted that sits in the museum's library, or simply every time I walk through the museum's doors or share his story, I know that I'm doing so to honor and preserve his memory. Continuing his work and preserving his legacy are 2 of the driving forces behind my passion for sharing his story and supporting our museum. At the end of my grandfather's Shoah Project interview, he was asked the question, "Why do you share your story when bringing up such memories must be so painful?" His answer has always stuck with me. He told the interviewer that he shares his story for 3 reasons. First, he said, "Unless you remember your past, you will be doomed to relive it." To him, it was paramount that his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren didn't have to relive what he went through. Secondly, was to refute the revisionists who claimed and continue to claim that the Holocaust was nothing but a Jewish hoax. He would implore his audiences to understand that he was an eyewitness and that everything he said was the absolute truth. He went on to say that if this false history was to be believed, it would be like killing his father, sister, uncles, aunts, and cousins a second time, and he wouldn't let these Holocaust deniers get away with it. Finally, he would appeal to his audience that they should fight prejudice on every level and not simply stand by when someone makes abusive remarks against another race or religion. He would reference the famous quote from German pastor Martin Niemöller. "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." That's what the Germans did, and that's what the world did, he would say. They stood by and watched without doing anything. Don't be passive. When you see an injustice, stand up, speak up, and take a stand. Don't be bystanders. Be upstanders in this society of ours. Our museum works passionately to instill these important lessons my grandfather taught almost 30 years ago in each of its thousands of annual visitors. But our work is not nearly complete. While the recent rise of anti-Semitic incidents is incredibly troubling, we can't be discouraged. Yom HaShoah not only honors the millions of innocents who perished, but reminds us of our sacred duty to prevent something like the Holocaust from ever happening again. This message is more important today than it has been for decades. Together, we can make an impact, and I thank each of you for helping me honor the legacy of my grandfather. Please continue to support our museum and its ever important work to rid the world of hatred, bigotry, and indifference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Please help welcome to lead in the legacy and acceptance part of the program, Holocaust survivor Sharon Pitlock-Silver and Andy Lowenthal, descendant of survivor Michael Lowenthal.
We take this oath. We take it in the shadows of flames whose tongues scar the soul of our people. We vow in the name of dead parents and children, with our sadness hidden, our faith renewed, we shall never let the sacred memory of our perished 6 million be scorned or erased. We saw them. They were hungry and in fear. We saw them rush to battle. We saw them in the loneliness of night, true to their faith. At the threshold of death, we saw them. We received their silence in silence and merged their tears with ours. Deportations, executions, mass graves, death camps, mute prayers, cries of revolt, desperation, torn scrolls, cities and towns, villages and hamlets, the young, the old, the rich, the poor, ghetto fighters and partisans, scholars and messianic dreamers, ravaged faces, fists raised like clouds of fire, all have vanished. We take this oath. Vision becomes word to be handed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, from generation to generation. Remember what the Nazi killers and their accomplices did to our people. Remember them with rage and contempt. Remember what an indifferent world did to us and to itself. Remember the victims with pride and with sorrow. Remember also the deeds of the righteous Gentiles. We shall also remember the miracle of the Jewish rebirth in the land of our ancestors. In the independent state of Israel, let our legacy endure as a stone of the temple wall.
We accept the obligation of this legacy. We are the generation born after the darkness. Through our parents' and grandparents' memories, words, and silence, we are linked to that annihilated Jewish existence whose echoes permeate but consciousness. We dedicate this pledge to you, our parents and grandparents, to all 6 million whose unyielding spiritual and physical resistance, even in the camps and ghettos, exemplifies our people's commitment to life. We pledge to remember. We shall teach our children to preserve forever that uprooted Jewish spirit which could not be destroyed. We shall tell the world of the depths to which humanity can sink and the heights which we attained, even in hell itself. We shall fight anti-Semitism and all forms of racist hatred by our dedication to freedom throughout the world. We affirm our commitment to the state of Israel and to the furtherance of Jewish life in our homeland. We are your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. We are here.
And now we welcome back Hazzan Jacob Sandler for the closing part of the program. Thank you.
I invite those who are able to rise. Malay Rachamim Shochet Bameromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanefei HaShekhinah B'ma'alot Kedoshim Utehorim Kizohar Haraki Amazirim Lenishmot Kol Acheinu B'nei Yisrael Shenitbechu Vashoah Anashim Nashim Vata Shenechneku V'shenisrefu V'shenehergo Shemasru et nafsham al kiddush Hashem B'Auschwitz, b'Maidanek, b'Treblinka, בכל המחנות באירופה שהלכו לעולמם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אנא פעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. We stay risen for the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'vyomechon u'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kari ve'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh ve'yithadar ve'yitale ve'yithalal shmei dekudsha barichu le'ela min kol birchata ve'shirata tush bechata ve'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma ve'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. May the memories of all those who perished throughout the Holocaust and those who survived and have since perished, may all their memories continue to be for a blessing, and may their stories continue to be told and remembered. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazzan, and thank you everyone for joining us for this service. Have a great day.